to multifamily. Now, what I'm going to talk about is really the basics of what you need to know to go from everything from getting started to starting to do due diligence on a multifamily building. Multifamily and real estate investing in general is a massive, massive topic. So there's only so much we can go over in 45 minutes. So what I'm going to do is basically, I'm going to have the conversation I would have if I was sitting down with a brand new client and they were like, James, thinking about multifamily, what do I need to know? The only part of the equation I'm not really going to be talking about is the financing piece. Why? Because Keaton just went over the most important pieces of what you need to know from a financing perspective getting into multifamily. So we're going to talk about how multifamily works, how to find multifamily buildings, and if you've got one on the hook, what do you do next? That should give you just enough information to be dangerous. And if you think multifamily is for you after having this initial presentation, then myself and Adrian on the Mogul team both have our commercial licenses and we both own a ton of apartment buildings. So we are very happy to be your go-to guys when it comes to talking about multifamily. Now, right here, pew, that's me. Wow, I don't even have a beard in that photo. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that is me standing in front of the very first apartment building I ever purchased. This is a picture that was taken in July in Edmonton. All the Edmontonians, thank you for the laugh. Yes, there's like knee-deep snow. That was not taken in July. I think that might have been February. Anyways, that's me standing in front of my first building. So, like I said, this one is 18 units. It had 6 one-bedrooms, 6 two-bedrooms, 6 three-bedrooms. That's a great suite mix, as we say. So I told you guys a story earlier about the 12-suiter I bought. That was actually the second building I ever bought. We bought them within about 2 months of each other. So I always kind of get them mixed up in my head because it was over 10 years ago. This one, we didn't do any repositioning at all. It was squeaky clean, rented to great tenants. The building was in terrific shape, but we bought it just as the market was taking off back in 2013. So we were in the right place at the right time. We bought it, literally just raised all the rents by $100. Everybody was happy to pay their increased rent, and we were able to refinance and pull all of our entire down payment out immediately. So I'm not going to pretend I was a genius by doing that. I was in the right place at the right time and had enough information about how financing works to make the right move. And those funds allowed us to roll into our next multifamily building. So to rewind the clock a little bit further back, I bought my first single family building in 2007. So guys, it took me a full 5.5 years of buying single family houses before I was ever comfortable even thinking about buying a multifamily building. And then once I started buying multifamily buildings, I was able to acquire, like I said, I've done 15 transactions and I currently hold 12 of those buildings. So I'm coming from a place of not just a realtor that sells these things for a living, but I've bought a few and I know what it's like going through the whole process. So I'm going to kind of tell you guys about the journey of initial things that you need to know. So the question that I had to ask myself that you guys are probably asking yourself is, when should I look at multifamily? Why would somebody get into multifamily? When is the right time for me? And some of you who might be watching this presentation are in a net worth position where you've got $500,000 kicking around. You technically could get a multifamily right now. Do you want to buy 3 or 4 houses, or do you want to just get right into owning a multifamily? So, there's a lot of questions involved with deciding whether or not it's a good fit. So I'm going to start with the comment I made about available cash reserves. Multifamily is expensive. And the reason I say that is not only because, if you're buying a 12-unit apartment building, it's going to cost in the millions versus one house, which in Edmonton could be $350,000. It's also expensive because it's a little bit trickier to just put 20% down. Now, if you want to talk about CMHC financing, there is an opportunity to get high leverage financing, but for the most part, you're actually looking at putting closer to 25% down when you get a multifamily building. In addition to that, a home inspection on a house costs $600. A building condition assessment report on multifamily costs like $7,500. When you are in single family, the bank pays the commission for the mortgage broker. When you're dealing with multifamily, you as the borrower pay the mortgage broker's commission, which could be, several tens of thousands of dollars. Then you get, because you're borrowing the money in multifamily, you get to pay the bank's legal fee for placing the loan. So you pay your legal fees and the bank's legal fees. So that adds up to thousands of dollars. And then things cost more in buildings. A furnace in a house, $7,000. A boiler in a multifamily apartment building, $30,000 to $40,000. A roof in the single family game, $7,000. Re-roofing an apartment building, $30,000 to $50,000. And I can just keep going. So the point that I'm trying to make is when you buy a house, maybe you're going to put a $5,000 contingency fund to the side to account for the cost of maybe some vacancies, maybe some stabilization, some initial repairs and maintenance. In multifamily, add a zero. You might want to put $50,000 away to have sufficient reserves, available. So when you're looking at a multifamily building, usually you're going to need like 30 to 35% of the purchase price available for your down payment, closing costs, and contingency fund. So, if you're thinking, oh, I've got $200,000 kicking around, maybe I can buy a $1 million building at 20% down. Your buying power is not nearly go as far as it will in single family. So the first thing you want to consider is, do I even have enough cash to do this? And if the answer is no, then it might be in your best interest to buy another fourplex or to save up more, or to raise capital to create a business partnership. But remember, one of the biggest downfalls that I have seen with every single multifamily investor who's had things go awry is just not having sufficient reserves to deal with contingency. And that happens. That happens all the time. So have more cash than you need and understand that part of the value of investing in multifamily is economies of scale. So what do I mean by economies of scale? Well, let's say that you have $5 million of purchasing power. You could buy 10 $500,000 houses, or you could buy one $500,000 apartment buildings. Well, I can tell you, it is, if each acquisition represents 1 unit of time, it's 10 times more work to buy 5 houses than 1 apartment building. So from a capital efficiency perspective, your return on investment goes down a little bit, but the efficiency of your capital goes up. And so in a way, like the dollar per hour that you earn on your capital goes way up. It's a much more efficient way of generating return on investment. There's also economies of scale in terms of property management. Property management fees are lower in multifamily. And if you're doing a renovation project, typically you can get your costs down if you're doing 20 kitchens all at once, or if you're doing 20 bathrooms all at once, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that piece of it. The other piece that you want to ask yourself is a comfort level piece, because there's something to be said for diversifying your risk across multiple properties and multiple locations. If you put all of your eggs in the basket of one multifamily apartment building, it's got to go well. And if it doesn't go well, all of your capital is tied up in that and you're along for a bumpy ride. So I personally think my story and my comfort level was transitioning into multifamily after building a portfolio of single family, because it was doing multiple smaller deals first and to then build up to a larger, more complicated deal. For me, that helped me build my confidence. That helped me diversify my risk across multiple properties. And when I moved into that multifamily, it didn't represent the entirety of my real estate holdings. It also allowed me to learn things like principles of landlording, principles of revenue minus expenses, profit generation. at a smaller scale before I went bigger. So most investors kind of follow that trajectory. The other thing to be mindful of, and Keaton talked about this, I talked about this, is you reach a point where it's more difficult to obtain residential financing, and it just makes sense to switch to commercial. So usually it's a combination of building your confidence, building your capital base, and getting tapped out on residential that pushes people into multifamily. So, you know, if you're someone who's like, you know, a higher net worth business owner where you don't take a lot of personal income, so it's hard for you to get residential mortgages, you know, those are the kind of people that typically hop into commercial multifamily right from the get-go. So there's no right answer, obviously. And, you know, I mean, usually subjective answers get the it depends narrative where, well, should I go into multifamily? Well, it depends. Well, those are some of the factors that it depends on. So again, that's a high level glimpse at the factors that you should be considering. But if you're already thinking multifamily, then you should be talking to me or Adrian. We can sit down and pick away at the specifics of your situation to see, you know, give you some pros and cons of each course of action to help steer you in the right direction. Now here is, so Keaton had his super cool triangle graphic to explain what cap rate is. Now the reason, so for those of you guys who are a little more inclined for the algebra, which would be myself, it's a 3-variable calculation. Cap rate equals net operating income divided by building value. So you can move the denominator over to this numerator, and now you've got, like, the calculation you can isolate each of these variables. Those of you that are not so algebra inclined, the two things that you typically want to know are either figuring out what the cap rate is or figuring out what the building value is. You're almost always going to know the net operating income, but we either want to figure out what the cap rate is or we want to figure out what the building value is. Now, why do we want to figure that out? Well, we really want to answer the first and most important question, which is, what is a cap rate? Cap rate stands for capitalization rate. And what capitalization rate is a percentage that lets you know what percentage of that building's value turns into profit every year. So to understand what that means, we need to look at the term net operating income. Net operating income, so remember, there's gross, there's net. Gross is like top line. How much money did you make? Net is bottom line. How much money did you keep? So when you hear net, in your mind, think revenue minus expenses. So net operating income is the gross income, your rent, minus your expenses, which are taxes, insurance, management costs, maintenance, equals your net. Now here's where, hard stop, big exclamation point, this is what you need to really, really wrap your head around, is I did not say the mortgage financing. When we analyze residential deals, we treat the mortgage financing as an expense. However, in multifamily analysis, the mortgage, the loan, is independent of the building's performance. Because you could buy that building cash. You could buy that building with a line of credit. You could buy that building with 3 or 4 different versions of a mortgage based on how much you're putting down and which lender you're going to. There's so much variation in where the money comes from to buy the building that in order to accurately compare apples to apples, we measure strictly the building's performance independently of the financing. Now that's such an important concept that I'm literally just going to repeat myself. We measure the building's performance independently of the financing. So when we're looking at cap rate, when we're calculating net operating income, the mortgage is over here. All of this stuff happens before we get a mortgage. And then once we do these calculations, it's going to inform the lender of the building's performance so that we then can start looking at mortgage options. So take the mortgage, throw it over there. We're not talking about it. We're just talking about the building's performance. So the net operating income, that's right here. That's how much money the building is making. That's the profitability of the building. We divide it by the building value. How much is the building worth? That gives us a percentage, the cap rate. Now, a lot of times rookie investors will look at residential buildings and say, oh, what's the cap rate on this? We don't use cap rate in residential. We use cash on cash yield. I'm not going to get into those nuances, but know that key takeaway, cap rate applies to commercial, cash on cash yield applies to residential. So if you're looking at a commercial property and comparing it to a residential property, you're going to have to translate the commercial property into a yield, which is a whole different ball of wax. That's more of a Keaton question, or book a consult with Adrian or I, because we're going deep in the math. So I'm going to wind it back to the most important high-level concept. Cap rate. When we look at multifamily properties, the market is based on cap rates. And what I mean by that is, in different markets around Canada, buildings will perform at different levels. And it's really an indicator of the risk level of that market. So for example, something like downtown Vancouver, not very risky. Not very risky at all. It's one of the best performing markets in Canada. So because it's not very risky, it's an expensive market to buy in, the cap rate is going to be low. If you want to buy a multifamily building in downtown Vancouver, you're looking at like a 1 to 2% cap rate. Conversely, let's look at something way more risky. Small town Alberta, you know, like let's say, I don't know, Fox Creek. Anybody here even heard of Fox Creek? If you haven't, probably for the best. But if you have, it's just a little pinprick on the map, and it's like an oil boom and bust town. So the cap rates in that town are going to be way higher. Why? Because it's riskier. There's a small population that's subject to the volatility of the oil market. So when it's good, it's really good. When it's bad, it's really bad. So you need to see a higher cap rate to account for that risk. So think about this in terms of stocks. Higher risk stocks have a higher potential to produce a higher annual percentage. Lower risk stocks, or GICs, produce a lower annual percentage. Buildings are the same way. So when we look at the market, when we look at multifamily building market, we're looking at whether the cap rate is higher or lower, and then whether the building we're looking at has an appropriate cap rate for the market we're looking at. So for example, in Edmonton, buildings are sitting around a 5.5 to 5 cap for mid-grade product. So if you find a building that's a 6.5 cap, you're going to think to yourself, what's wrong with this building? There's obviously a risk factor here that has a higher cap rate than market. If you look at a building that has a 4 cap, you're like, is this building overpriced? Or is there something really special about this building that I'm not aware of? Maybe it's all newly renovated. Maybe it's in an A+ location. So understanding the math of that cap rate is critical. So the first step is get the net operating income, calculate it. We're going to talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, and then divide it by the asking price for the building value. That's the cap rate. Now, conversely, and this is how you kind of eyeball multifamily buildings at a glance in the marketplace. You're going to know the net operating income of a building from the financials or the pro forma that you get from the realtor, and you're going to know the prevailing cap rate in your market. So net operating income divided by cap rate tells you the building value. So without even looking at a list price, you know, again, back to Edmonton, you're like, okay, I think that based on my market knowledge and assessment, this area in Edmonton should be trading at a 5.5 cap. Net operating income divided by 5.5 cap, this building is probably worth X million dollars. So understanding how to use cap rate as your indicator of market value, and then how to mathematically relate it to the net operating income and how that spits out the building value, until you can just like in your mind work that triangle or work this algebra calculation just like second nature, I wouldn't recommend moving too much deeper into the multifamily world. I know if you hate algebra, you're going to hate this, but keep in mind, I put a really complicated mathematical thing on the background to make light of the fact that this is actually very basic grade 7 algebra. It is literally a 3 variable equation. So hop on a YouTube video, go through it 4 or 5 times, give yourself a headache, have a break, drink a glass of water, have a nap, get back to it. Until you can nail this cap rate calculation and understanding, it's going to be very hard for you to exist in multifamily. So that's kind of my key takeaway from this slide. Now, why does cap rate matter? Cap rate matters a lot because it dictates the value of your building. So let's do a little math here. So remember, let's go back 1 slide. Building value equals net operating income divided by cap rate. Okay. Building value equals net operating income divided by cap rate. So let's say that I can increase my rent by $1,000 per year. How do I do that? We'll talk about that in a second. Let's say that I can increase my rent by $1,000 a year. Divided by cap rate, let's use 5%, nice and easy. I just increased my building value 20,000 bucks. That's pretty sweet. So in residential, the value of your building is dictated by whatever the neighbor's building is operating at. In multifamily, you know the prevailing cap rate of the neighborhood, and then the higher you can get the net operating income, the more valuable your building is. So let's use the example of my first purchase. 18 units times 12 months in a year times $100 a month on average of increase performance divided by our cap rate, and we bought it at a 6 cap. We increased the value of that sucker by $360,000 by just delivering rental notices and then managing the increase of rent over a 6-month period. Okay, this is why multifamily gets exciting, because independently of the retail market going up and down, you can shift the value of a building by playing offense and defense. So for those of you who know me, I love NFL. So here we have a guy holding the ball. He's the offense. He's trying to score points. Here's the defense trying to stop the offense from scoring points. So I love this analogy because offense in a multifamily building means increasing the rents. So we renovate the suites to improve them. We find a building where the rents are below market value for some reason or another. We increase the services in the building. Maybe we install perks like in-suite laundry. Whatever we can do to increase the rent, that's offense. And remember, every dollar we increase that net operating income goes to the building value. Or we can play defense. We can decrease the expenses. Maybe there's a property manager who's getting overpaid. Maybe there's a property manager who's doing a bunch of unnecessary repairs and maintenance to the building. Maybe there is an inefficient boiler or old windows leaking heat, costing money. Maybe there's a bunch of water leaks in a bunch of the toilets, and the existing property manager isn't paying close enough attention to the building to catch those water and therefore money leaks. So part of the art of finding a good multifamily deal for a value-added play is in the due diligence process, finding opportunities to play offense and defense. How do we increase the profitability? By increasing the rent, increasing the expenses. We'll talk about that next. So where do we find deals? Okay, so in the residential game, you can build your entire portfolio by going on Realtor.ca, looking at deals, analyzing them, and buying them. Most residential deals end up on MLS. Now, a lot of us have bought off-market residential deals, or maybe you've found a for-sale buyout, or like there's a lot of places to find deals, but for the most part, the majority of properties that trade hands do so just on the market, on MLS. Realtors make that happen. In the commercial world, it doesn't quite work that way. For whatever reason, commercial realtors don't typically put their properties on MLS. Now, you can go on MLS and there will be some properties listed for sale, there's no doubt about it. But most commercial realtors want to get the entire commission for the sale. They don't like sharing the commission with other buyers agents. So if you're looking at some of the big commercial shops like CBRE, Cushman Wakefield, Colliers, NAI, to name a few, they have their internal client list. They'll get a listing and they'll market to their own client list and just try to sell it to their clients. Now that's something that we do a little bit differently at Mogul. Adrian literally talks to every multifamily realtor in the city like once a week and has a compiled list of all of the available multifamily inventory. But for the most part, most multifamily realtors will just try to sell buildings to their own internal database. So you either need a multifamily realtor that plays nice with all the other multifamily realtors, or you need to have relationships with multiple multifamily realtors so you can be on their list. Another great way to create deals is coming to networking events like this in person. And by the way, Mpogul Mastermind happening live in person in Edmonton. It's the first time you can actually shake somebody's hand and talk about real estate in a very long time. So you guys got to come out for that because it's going to be exciting. And I'll tell you, networking. That first building I bought, how did I find it? I got excited about buying multifamily. I started telling everybody I knew that I was getting into wanting to buy multifamily building, and a mortgage broker who knew a mortgage broker who knew a guy who kind of wanted to sell his building. They made the intro, I bought the building. Just put the word out there. Second building I bought was a realtor colleague of mine from the office that I was at, had a brother-in-law that knew a cousin that was thinking that had an apartment building. That's how we bought the second building. So if you put it out there and you go to networking events and you let everybody who touches the multifamily space know that you're interested in buying one, deals start coming to you. It's pretty impressive. Another great place is property managers. In the commercial space, very few people actually manage their own building. Most owners will hire a commercial property manager. So if you get in good with and talk to commercial property managers, they're going to know if they have clients that are looking at buying and selling. So that's actually a very powerful source of deals for you in the multifamily space. So how do I find a good deal? Well, number one is be ready. In the multifamily space, there are so few multifamily realtors that if you start, like in the residential space, it's very common to tie up a property and try to find a joint venture partner and it doesn't work out. And there's hundreds of realtors out there. There's only a handful of really good ones like Mogul Realtors. Shameless self-plug. But there are a lot of realtors out there. So if you're a new investor and you waste a bunch of realtors' time and you feel kind of bad about it and they fire you as a client, you can find another realtor and start looking at more deals. In the multifamily space, your word will get around really quick that you're a time waster, and then all of a sudden you won't be on those realtors' A-list. Because the due diligence period in multifamily can take upwards of 2 to 3 months, the market can shift in those 2 to 3 months. And so a lot of the times, we as multifamily realtors only have one shot to sell that building. So we want to make sure that we're getting the right client to offer on the building and someone who can close reliably. So being ready means your cash is in place, you know your financing package is going to work, and you're ready to act fast. Because especially in the multifamily space, good deals go quick. They go fast. It's important to stay top of mind. So call your realtor, every week or two. Hey, you got any good deals? Call those property managers. Hey, do you have any good deals? Let everyone know what you're looking for and remind them. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. And because there are so few multifamily deals that actually change hands, you need to be top of mind for as many people as possible so that when a good deal comes up, it can come your way. In residential, we see a good property hit the market every couple of days that makes sense as an investment. In multifamily, especially if you have very tight criteria, you might only see a deal every 6 months, every 8 months. So you got to be ready to snag it when it comes up. Otherwise, you might be waiting a while for your next multifamily opportunity. So let's say that you've done all the things. You have found a good deal, you stayed top of mind, you're ready to put in an offer, you negotiate it out, you put in the contract. I'm not going to go over the specifics of what a multifamily contract is going to look like because that's my job, that's Adrian's job. When you get to the point of putting in an offer, we'll take care of all the details. But what you should know is, how the heck do I analyze one of these things? Well, let's talk about that. So multifamily due diligence. So here's another apartment building I bought, and I'll tell you, this is due diligence. If you're a numbers nerd like me, then you get really into the depth of the spreadsheet. I like doing due diligence. There are 5 areas of due diligence that you are going to need to go through in order to accurately assess the feasibility of a multifamily investment. Now, here's my warning. Due diligence in multifamily is expensive. Remember, $7,000 inspection. You might spend $20,000 or $30,000 on a building you don't buy. For real. That's part of multifamily investing. So to start back to the earlier question, am I ready to start multifamily investing? Well, are you ready to spend, say $10,000, $15,000 on inspections only to learn that you shouldn't buy a building? Because if that's not where you're at yet, then go back to single family and spend $700 on a building you might not buy. Just being really, really honest with you guys, because nothing's worse than spending a year of your life pursuing opportunities that don't make sense for you when you could have just bought another really great residential property. So 5 areas of due diligence. There's inspections, very similar to single family. There's permits and licensing, very similar to single family. Property management. This is a little bit unique from single family because oftentimes in single family, we're buying a building that wasn't a rental that we're going to turn into a rental. So there might not be pre-existing property management. But in multifamily, there's always pre-existing property management of some form or another that we want to do due diligence on. In multifamily, there's always pre-existing tenants that we want to do our due diligence on. So we'll talk about that. There's the financial documents. Remember, you're buying a business with a location. The business, the service is providing a place to live. The location is the building. You're buying a business. Businesses have financial documents, and the value of the building depends on the net operating income. The net operating income can be determined by looking at the financial documents. And that's what the bank's going to look at when they approve financing too. So you need to be good at your financial documents. And then your final financial analysis. Once you've read through the documents, you put them into your own spreadsheet and you run your model. So let's get going on due diligence. How? Inspections from the seller. So these are the kind of things that you might already be able to get from the vendor, from the seller of the building. So you want to ask for this stuff. Number one, what major updates have they done to the building? Have they replaced the roof? Have they replaced the boiler, windows, major suite upgrades? What have they been up to in there? I want to know. And I want to see all the receipts and invoices. Maybe it's under warranty. I don't know. I want to see that stuff. Last building condition assessment in phase one. Again, because we're dealing in a business, usually vendors have the inspectors from when they bought the building. Fire inspection. So the city fire department comes by regularly and inspects that building to make sure it's up to fire code. You're held to a different standard because it's a commercial building, it's commercial fire code. Health services reports. So Alberta Health Services in Edmonton will do regular health inspections of the building to make sure that it's up to snuff from the health and safety code. And then backflow preventer valve. There's an inspection for that as well. Not so sexy, but you want to have a service backflow preventer valve. What we want to schedule as buyers for due diligence is number one, an all-suite tour. I want my eyeballs in every suite. If they say, oh, this tenant this, there's a reason for that. We can't go in the suite because of this. It's a red flag. I want my eyes in every single suite. I want to see what's going on in there. I want to take pictures. I want to take notes. I want to know what's going on. Building condition assessment and phase one environmental. Keaton touched on this as well. This is basically the equivalent of a home inspection, but for commercial. Now, in residential, a residential inspector has disclaimers coming out the yin-yang on their residential inspection report. But in commercial, liability is important. Therefore, an engineer actually performs sections of the building condition assessment so that there's somebody with a professional designation to hold a bit of liability for these people. There is the insurance quote. Different insurance, again, there's a lot of variability. So I would get an insurance quote on the building as part of my due diligence. And then you have to get an appraisal. And guess who gets to pay for the appraisal? Hint, it's you, just like everything else in commercial. It's expensive. So you might pay for all this stuff, and there might be an issue in there you don't buy the building. Again, I'm not trying to scare you away. I'm just being realistic so that you're budgeting for success when you approach these opportunities. And then you might want to do a secondary inspection depending on the age of some of these items. Call a plumber in to look at the boiler. Call an electrician in to look at the electrical. Call a structural engineer in to look at the foundation. We walked away from a building in 2016 because of foundation issues. And the vendors actually, whoever's mic is on, please turn it off. We walked away from a building because the vendor provided us with an engineering report. We wanted to double check it, and the double check was very problematic. And then roof. I'm not going to tell Bruno's roof story in the interest of time. So let's talk about the fire inspection. This is just to get all of your attention. Ladies, these guys are going to come by and look at the building. What are they going to look at? They're going to look at stuff that is not nearly as sexy as this picture. They're going to look at fire alarms. They're going to look at sprinkler systems. They're going to look at smoke doors. They're going to look at fire suppression. They're going to look at all of the fire safety code. And I'll tell you, getting fire safety upgrades to an apartment building is expensive as all hell. So it really pays to get a fire inspection from the fire department done to the building before you decide to proceed, because usually when buildings change hands, the city will reach out to you to schedule a fire inspection. And again, you're learning from my mistakes. The third building we ever bought, we had to spend like $25,000 installing fire hoses on each floor for fire suppression because of some this, that, and the other from a code perspective. So remember, fire inspections aren't as sexy as this picture, but they'll save you a lot of money. Inspection number 2. Speaking of not sexy, we have a bed bug inspection. Bed bugs are one of the most maddening and expensive things that can happen to one of your buildings, because in all jurisdictions, the tenants aren't responsible for bed bug remediation. You as the landlord are. So even if the tenants have brought the bed bugs into the building, you're footing the bill. And in multifamily buildings, one can become adjacent suite, above suite, below suite in like 2 weeks. So if left uncapped, you're going from spending $2,000 remediating one suite to $10,000 for neighboring suites, and then it propagates out. And all of a sudden you're playing a game of whack-a-mole that costs you tens of thousands of dollars trying to like nip all of these bed bug outbreaks in the butt. It is crazy expensive. So a bed bug inspection, they get this cute little dog that can smell what bed bugs smell like. They go in every suite, and the dog indicates whether there's bed bugs in any of the units. Critical part of the inspection process. And again, between this and the fire inspection, this can save you an insane amount of money that, again, as a new multifamily investor, you might not even think about these things because you're like, oh, I got my building condition assessment. What, you know, the engineers don't check for bed bug stuff and they don't do a fire inspection. Permits and licenses from the seller. So we want to get the tax assessment, we want to get the title. You can learn a lot about their motivations from the title. And then you want to see that RPR with compliance. I'm not going to get too deep into this one because this is pretty much the same as residential, but you want to see all this stuff to make sure there isn't any funny business going on. In addition to that, you want a letter from the vendor that authorizes you to do a city search for development permit, business license, and legal number of suites. So when, like Adrian and I have a templated letter that we use during our transactions for our clients to request this from the city, from the seller. I had, with one of my clients, a 12-suite unit pending, and the deal fell apart because there were only 11 authorized suites, and a very generously sized storage room had been converted into a pretty decently sized bachelor suite. And the seller thought nobody was going to notice. We noticed. And it, I mean, dramatically changed the value of the building. So we ended up saving our buyer a ton of money on that. Next thing we want to look at is property management. So what's some of the stuff you want to review? You want to look at the contract with the current property manager. Are there out clauses? Are you able to change it? What are you paying for as the owner? What is the property manager paying for as part of the service? Super critical stuff, because if you don't like it, can you change it? What are you obligated to? Is there time left on it? There's a lot of things you want to look at in that PM agreement. You want the contact for the property manager and on-site manager. And these are people you want to interview to see what they're like, what their management philosophy is, what they feel market rents are trending towards, et cetera, et cetera. I want to see maintenance logs. Things that are like, how often are they servicing the boiler? There should be a log in Edmonton anyways. Vancouver, does it even snow? I don't know. In Edmonton, there should be a log of when they shovel the snow. If they're not keeping a log of when they shovel the snow, it's a liability issue. It just gives you a clue as to how the building is being managed. So maintenance logs for the property. You want to see the current lease agreements, move-in reports, and deposit history. Is the money that's supposed to be coming in? I want to see that stuff. And the laundry agreement. Most multifamily buildings that are in that kind of more affordable range, you have coin laundry or card laundry. And so we want to see what that, if those machines are leased, owned by the building, what's going on with that. When we interview the property manager, we want to see if this person is in touch with the people, or if this person is like in their office and doesn't go to the building. Because it's very, very important to have an on-site manager who takes care of the building, who's part of the building culture, who's part of the building vibe, and a property manager who's in touch with the tenant. In addition to that, I like to go to the building at a time of day when people are going to typically be hanging around. Like I like to do my all-suite tour around 5:30 in the evening, because then people are coming home from work, and you can ask them, how do you like living here? How's the property manager maintaining your suite? How are the neighbors? Anybody here ever had bed bugs? Do people in this building smoke? You know, like just ask pointed questions. And, you know, during the all-suite tour, if you see an ashtray full of cigarettes sitting on the coffee table, maybe you don't have to use smoke. It's pretty obvious. But you know, you want to get into that, because keep in mind, one smoky tenant. If you want to remedy that situation, you're going to have to eliminate that tenant, remove them from the property, or let their lease expire or whatever. You're going to have 2 to 3 months of vacancy while you turn that suite over. And renovating a suite from smoke damage costs nowadays about 20 grand. So when I look at that one smoker suite, in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is a $25,000 tick on the building. So that tour can tell you a lot about what's going on in there. Next, we get into the financial documents. So what are we requesting from the seller? I want to see utilities bills from the last 2 years. I want to see a current rent roll. I want to see the financial statements, and I want them signed by the seller for liability. That's the seller putting their signature to the financial documents. It holds them more accountable, so if something bad happens after closing, it's easier to sue them. I want to see operating statements from the last 2 years. Very few owners are going to do their own bookkeeping and tax filing. So you're going to have proper financial statements from the accountant. If you don't, it could be a red flag, or it could be an indicator of an opportunity, because you should be able to get the building for cheaper if there isn't proper financial records. So having the finances in order, tight, and to have the building producing does add value to that building. Because remember, the net operating income determines the building value. So if the net operating income is tight and the financials are organized, it's a determiner of building value. You want to look at the current or recent appraisal and a copy of their insurance policy. These are all things I want to see. Now, what am I looking for? Let's say that, you know, you're going through last year's financials, and then all of a sudden there was like, oh, there's a $20,000 expense in July of maintenance. I want to know what that was about, because if it was a one-off, then you can add that money back into the net operating income. If the utilities are way higher than advertised, the financial analysis is where you get alignment between the advertising pro forma that the selling realtor put together and how the building is actually running. So here's a couple of words that you want to be on the lookout for when you're looking at that initial marketing pro forma versus the actual performance of the building. Words like projected and stabilized. Most pro formas will say projected and stabilized, which means that if you manage the building better or invest money into it, these are numbers you could hit. So you'll see stabilized utilities, which might be lower than the actual utilities. So that delta means you're paying more in expenses, which means your net operating income goes down, which means your building value goes down. So very often, especially if you're looking at kind of low to mid-range apartment buildings, you're going to see things in the financial analysis that are going to compress the value of the building because the building isn't performing as well as you thought it did. So when you're shopping multifamily buildings and you're looking at the pro forma, give it like a 10 to 15% allowance for assuming that the net operating income is over-exaggerated, and then proceed as such. Because typically, a selling realtor is going to put, like I said, stabilized or projected expenses and rent in there. Now, you really hit the jackpot if it's all actuals, all accurate, and the building still makes sense. But know that oftentimes when you're buying buildings, there's going to be a bit of a stretch there that you're going to have to fill a gap between how the building is currently performing and how it will perform. Because a lot of people sell multifamily buildings that they've owned for a while, and as a result, they keep the rent a little bit below market so they don't have to deal with the challenge of tenant turnover. Very, very typical when we're buying buildings. So we complete the financial analysis, and this is what our financial analysis model looks on our end. So it looks like a whole lot of stuff is going on here. If you book a consult with Adrian and I, we'll go through how to utilize this tool. But it's pretty simple at its base. At the top, you've got revenue, which are the rents. In the middle, you have the operating expenses. We see a net operating income over here, covers debt coverage ratio, and then it does a 2, 3, 4, 5-year projection based on rental inflation, and then a global analysis over here. Our spreadsheet isn't the best one. There's a lot of good spreadsheets out there. This is the one we use. We do a nice financial analysis. So, I mean, what you want to do is take all the stuff that you got here and plop it into your spreadsheet to do your own final analysis. That's really where the rubber meets the road. And that's kind of sometimes where a renegotiation happens. Because remember, if we find a smoky suite, or there's an issue with bed bugs, or there's an issue with this, or wait a second, the utilities are $5,000 a year higher than you said they were. You know, like all these little schisms come out in the financial analysis, and then you get to have a conversation with the seller about what the actual price of the building should be. So in terms of an order of operations, I ended with this, but you should start with it, because all of this financial analysis is free. You're not paying anybody to do this. You're just taking documents, picking through them. So until all the financial analysis checks out, I wouldn't be going into booking all those expensive inspections. But know that time is always of the essence. So like the second your deal is pending, I am riding the vendor or the selling realtor being like, I need this document, I need this document, I need this document. Get down to your analysis right away. And if there's documents missing, this is missing, that's missing, this missing, I need this, I need that. Go, 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 go. So guys, you can do it. I believe in you. If I can do it, you can do it. If Adrian can do it, you can do it. It's not really any harder, in my opinion, than investing in residential. It's just different. So it seems daunting because you know residential, you're comfortable with residential, you learned all the in and outs of residential, and now seems all brand new again. But in terms of the number of data points, the number of things you need to know, the number of steps you need to follow, it's really not that much more in multifamily. The real kind of like freaky part is that it's way more expensive, way more capital intensive. And so you kind of got to be ready for that. But once you're in the right headspace, you can definitely do it. And I believe in you guys. So that is my intro, my little taster on what buying, investing, getting into multifamily looks like. So I hope by the end of this conversation, you've come to one of two conclusions. Conclusion number one, it sounds pretty good, and you're going to schedule a time to chat with Keaton, Adrian about multifamily and adding it to your portfolio. Or you're like, I thought I was good to go with my $200,000, but now that I look at it, maybe I should focus on talking to my favorite Mogul agent about acquiring another residential property in this softening winter market.